Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and I'm on the hunt to build the perfect side for Game Week 1 in FPL. Today, I'm going to take a look at ranking all of the midfielders in FPL and come to a decision on which are the best at each price point. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be incredibly helpful. For now though, let's crack on with the show. Right then, before we get started, I just want to give you all a quick heads up that my mini league is now live for this season. The code is above. If it's too small for you to read, it's RQ7NIR. So make sure you join that ahead of Game Week 1. That would be really appreciated. And as always, all of the data you see on screen today comes from Fantasy Football Hub. I am affiliated with them this season, and if you wanted to sign up, the link is in the description below. It's 50% off at the moment, up until Game Week 1, I believe. In the meantime, though, let's have a quick look at the premium midfielders. Now, the way I'm going to break this up for the video will be the premium midfielders defined as the 12.5, that's Salah, all the way down to Foden and De Bruyne at 9.5 million. It's not quite premium, but because there just aren't that many options there, I wanted to include them in this category. But what we should remember when comparing them to Salah, for instance, is that there is a 3 million price difference. So that does matter, of course. Let's start off with Salah, though, and he is going to be popular in Game Week 1. I don't think there's anyone thinking he won't be, but whether or not he's going to provide value or not is the question. 12.5 million is, of course, a lot of money to spend on one player. There's only one other player more expensive, and that is Haaland. But he is owned by exactly 1/3 of the FPL manager base at the moment. 33.3% ownership is pretty decent, although it's not the same sort of heights that we're used to on Salah. So it does go to show that the pricing this season is pretty competitive, because most seasons past, when he's been 12.5 million or even 13, he's been much higher owned than this. So I think it does make a difference what the other players have come in at. But let's not forget just how effective Salah has been. I think every single season since he joined Liverpool, he's been part of the 200-point club. That's 200 points in FPL every single season. That is obviously a very high bar and a very high standard he sets himself. And I really see no reason why he wouldn't be able to match that or achieve another 200-point finish. What you're paying for that 12.5 million is that consistency of returns with Salah. And love him or hate him, he is phenomenal on the underlying data and of course on the output that he is able to produce at Liverpool. 0.74 XG per 90 is absolutely unreal. That's so good. And when you combine that with the 0.27 XA per 90, that creates an expected return more than once a game on average, which is unbelievably good. That is the gold standard for FPL assets. And when you combine that with the fact that he's got a good set of fixtures at the start of the season, ranked 4th on the FPL Fantasy Football Hub ticker for the first 5 game weeks from an attacking point of view, that's very decent. So he will be popular going into Game Week 1. And he also leads the expected points tallies out of all midfielders by not even just a margin, by quite a comfortable distance as well. There's almost 8 points, in fact, over 8 points between him and the next best, that being Foden. 39.8 expected points, that's from Fantasy Football Hub again, in the first 5 game weeks. That's almost 8 points a week on average that we're expecting to get out of him. So I really do think he will be good value for money. Even in the new system under Arne Slot, you still expect him to produce those chances, to get in front of goal often enough. And even if we saw a little decline in his performance at the start, I think the fixtures are good enough that he's still going to be a good option. He's my number 1 midfielder at the moment, and barring some sort of real change in opinion or some new information that comes to light, I can't see him leaving my Game Week 1 draft as it stands. Moving down the list, let's have a look at Foden and De Bruyne together, because they're both 9.5, they're both City midfielders. I think it's pretty clear which one I prefer at the moment though, and that is Phil Foden. He is owned by 5 times, maybe 4 times the amount of managers that De Bruyne is, and again, it's pretty clear to see why. Foden's stock is rising. De Bruyne is probably waning a little bit. That's not to say that he's a busted flush by any means. He's still going to get points. He's still going to contribute for City. No question about that. But the expected minutes are going down season on season. He is getting a bit older. They will manage him a little bit more this season. Even if he starts most games, he'll probably get taken off early a little bit more. And that expected data per 90 is obviously for the whole 90 minutes. So he needs to play 90 minutes to get to that kind of level. And Foden much more regularly achieves that. His expected data of 0.54 XGI per 90 is very, very decent. And when you take into account the team quality, the player quality, and the striker that he will be setting up, quite often you'd imagine, I think Foden, especially if he plays in that central role, will be brilliant this season yet again. The one thing, not against City assets, but the one thing that maybe you want to take into account is their opening set of fixtures aren't absolutely mind-blowing. They are 8th in the ticker for attacking fixtures for the first 5. That's still pretty decent, and I think if you're not going with Erling Haaland, either Foden or De Bruyne makes a lot of sense for captaincy coverage in game week 2 against Ipswich, for instance, but also in terms of points too. They are going to score a lot of points. They're 9.5 for a reason. And even though they're not expected to score the same sort of amount of points as Salah, they are 3 million cheaper. So if you were to go against someone like Salah or Haaland, for instance, if you fill out your squad with more of these premium or sub-premium midfielders, you're still getting really good returns, and maybe you can beat the premiums, the true premiums, Salah and Haaland, one of the two, in the aggregate of the additional benefit you get. Now, let's take a look at some of the others. Son Heung-min, I really do like the look of, to be honest. He's under 10% owned, so he's pretty differential at the moment. The expected points looking good. It matches Foden for the first 5. And his underlying attacking data is slightly better than Foden's as well. That's also taking into account that he didn't spend all of last season up front for Spurs. He was shifted over to the left quite regularly. And I think one big asterisk or one big question mark on Son Heung-min at the start of the season is whether or not he'll be playing left wing or up front for Spurs. If he starts the season up front, out of position as a striker, he could be one of the most important players to squeeze into your side in game week 1. His data up front is outstanding, and his output is outstanding as well. He almost always beats his expected data. The Spurs fixtures, whilst not amazing, are also not terrible, and he is so talismanic for them when he's playing out of position up front. So there's not really a lot going against Son Heung-min. The one asterisk I do have is whether or not he is actually going to play centre forward. I would actually probably argue he's more likely to play left wing, but let's keep an eye out for it, because that could be a really good pickup, and a differential one at that. Moving down, Saka and Palmer. They've both had big price hikes this season. Absolutely understandable. They were both phenomenal. Palmer really came out of almost nowhere. I think he started at 5 million. He's gone up to 10.5 this season. He's on penalties. That expected goals per 90 of 0.6 is absolutely outstanding. That's just under Salah. But the problem with Palmer, I think, is twofold. One, the fixtures at the moment aren't the best for Chelsea from an attacking point of view. Yes, they're green on the ticker, mostly anyway, but I think when you start looking at them and picking them apart, they're not ideal. I think Palace is in there, Man City's in there. We're talking pretty good defences, or at least historically good defences. Palmer will be fantastic. At some point this season, he will be a very, very important player to have. But I can't help but feel that 55% ownership is a little bit overcooked at the moment. And especially when there's an option 4 million cheaper with great pedigree, great underlying data in the same side. I think if you're going to go for one of the two, you save the 4 million perhaps and use that elsewhere, especially when the expected points between the two of them, and we'll come on to the 6.5 millions in a moment, is actually not that vast. There's only, I think, 4 points between Palmer and his teammate. So I think for me, Palmer is one that I'm going to leave for the time being, unless I go without Haaland, for instance, at which point it's much easier to squeeze in 2 or 3 of the midfield premiums. Saka's an interesting one. A quick word on him. 10 million, understandable, owned by a quarter of the game at the moment, but he has had a pretty long summer, as did Palmer. But the one thing on Palmer's side is that he didn't play that many minutes for England. Saka was a fundamental key element of the way England played and played almost the whole game every game. So he's had a long time now of playing football consistently. So he will probably come back needing a little bit of a break before pre-season kicks off for him. I'm sure he's excited to get going. He never misses a game anyway, so I'm not worried necessarily about him missing matches. I'm more worried about performance levels, and he might just take a couple of weeks to get fully up to 100% Saka, let's say. So I think 10 million is a good price. I think his data is unbelievable, 0.8 XGI per 90 if you combine the two. The fixtures aren't the best though, and when you have a look around the board in the premiums, there are other premiums that I think you can look at for now and then shift across to Saka later on down the line. That's not to say he's a bad option. I would like an Arsenal midfielder or an attacker from Arsenal in my Game Week 1 side, but looking at the fixtures from an attacking point of view and thinking about the long summer that Saka's had, I think maybe because our budget is limited to start with, he's one that I can bring in down the line. Maybe when Salah's fixtures get a little bit more tough, you can make the switch there. So that's my assessment of the premium midfielders. I think Salah is far and beyond anyone else in the list. I think Foden comes in second for me at the moment, then followed by Son. Actually, the order of this spreadsheet, that wasn't intentional, but I think those are my top three. Saka would probably come fourth, Palmer fifth, De Bruyne sixth, and obviously my reasons are pretty explained in this section. Let me know who you would want as a premium option in your Game Week 1 draft and whether or not you think I've underestimated the likes of Saka or Palmer from the start, because it is a game of opinions and there is all the chance in the world that they get off to a stormer, and I've called this one slightly incorrectly. So moving on to a really competitive price point this season, the 7.5 to 8.5 midfielders is pretty congested. There's a lot of good options there, and there's actually not much dividing or splitting the top four on this spreadsheet in terms of expected points over the first 5 game weeks. Gordon comes out on top, but there's only 0.1 in it to a player that not many people are considering at the moment, and that is Jared Bowen. We'll come on to him in a minute, but Fernandes is in there, another 0.1 behind. Erdegaard's also in there, another 0.1 behind. So there's not really anything in it between those four, so we'll treat them almost as equal for the first 5 game weeks. The advantage, I suppose, that Anthony Gordon does have is that he comes into the game this season off of a hot streak in FPL last year. His stock has risen and the fixtures are looking pretty good over the first 5 game weeks, better than the other 3 that I've just mentioned, if a little marginal with Bowen. Now, the thing with Gordon as well is he's got that really low-hanging fruit of that Game Week 1 fixture against Southampton at home, so you expect him to get off to a pretty good start from that game, and then maybe afterwards you can start reassessing. His underlying data is good, although it's not extraordinary. 0.48 XGI per 90 is still good, and it's still definitely good value for money at 7.5, but it's not so good and so far beyond anyone else in this price bracket that I don't think that there's an argument. I think you can look at differentiating yourself around this price point or lowering down to a 6.5 million midfielder whose expected points are very similar as well. So maybe that's somewhere that you could shave a little bit of money. That being said though, Gordon made it into my first draft. I think he's currently out, but I'm tinkering all the time, so what are you going to do? And Gordon is going to be a good option, no question about it. It's just whether or not he's a better option in terms of team structure than some of the other players at 6.5 million. Now, moving down, Bowen, as I've previously mentioned, I think caught me a little bit by surprise. His data is slightly better than Gordon's, 0.51 XGI per 90. He is under a new manager, under Lopetegui. We don't exactly know where he's going to play at the moment, but you'd expect it's going to be either a inside forward or centre forward as it stands. I'd be very surprised if he was hugging the wing. This data should be fairly consistent, even moving forward under new management, and the fixtures aren't half bad either. He's got slightly better goal threat than most of the players in this price point, and definitely slightly better than Gordon, as well as Fernandes and Erdegaard, who I'll come on to now. He is also pretty differential as well. So that is another thing that maybe if you wanted to be a little bit different but not really take too much of a risk, Bowen could be the option over the likes of Gordon. Now, West Ham's fixtures defensively are terrible, but from an attacking point of view, there are goals in there for West Ham, so I don't think it's that bad and that outlandish to go for Bowen from the off. Although I must admit, he's not made it into any drafts at the moment. Maybe that's just because I've underestimated him though. So the data does speak volumes. Don't discount him. He is differential. Definitely consider him. Fernandes and Ødegaard, will treat them as a bit of a duo because they're both the chief creators of their respective sides. They also have very similar underlying attacking data, so slightly better in Fernandes' case, 0.28 versus 0.22. But in terms of expected assists per 90, 0.3 each, they are obviously their team's chief creators. Now, I think with Fernandes, we overlook him a little bit because the quality around him recently hasn't been the best. They've been a little bit inconsistent, and despite Fernandes creating all of those chances, there haven't been players around him finishing those chances. So he has underperformed on his expected data, I think, over the last 2 seasons in a row. So he might be a player that, if you're willing to treat Man United with a little bit more caution, especially at 8.5, because he comes in under the likes of Gordon and Bowen and under some of the 6.5s, I'm not sure it's good value for money from the off. Maybe we wait for the fixtures to soften. We have a quick look at him over the first 5 whilst the fixtures aren't that great from an attacking point of view, and then bring him in after game week 5 or 6. And that might be the time to start having a look at the likes of Bruno Fernandes when we have a bit more confidence and the fixtures are a little bit better as well. Moving on to Ødegaard properly, I think he is a very good differential option, although at 17% owned, not that differential, but I think he is someone that you could arguably put in ahead of Saka at 1.5 million cheaper. I think the problem is with Ødegaard, he's not as often on penalties, although he has been known to take the odd one. And that data, especially the XG per 90, is a lot lower than some of the other players in not only this spreadsheet, but also some of the 6.5s as well. So you are relying a little bit more on his creativity. And if you're relying on creativity, why aren't you looking at the likes of Saka, the likes of Trossard, the likes of Havertz as well, who are the ones who are probably going to be finishing off the chances that Ødegaard creates? He is good on the bonus points. He does rack up the FPL points. But at 8.5 million, with the set of attacking fixtures they've got to start, I think it's a bit like Fernandes. I'm willing to just swerve him for now, wait for now, and kind of reconsider the Arsenal mids later on down the line. Quick word on the Liverpool boys. So Diaz and Jota both come in at 7.5. I do like the look of both of them in theory, but again, I just want to see which of them are the most nailed going into game week 1. Salah, I think there's no question, but any of the other front 3, front 4, whatever system Arne Slot's going to be playing, it looks like a 4-2-4 by the way. So maybe there is space for most of them, but one of them will likely miss out sometimes. And especially when you've got Gakpo to consider, Darwin to consider, we can't really guarantee the minutes, especially of Jota, who quite often does end up getting himself injured as well. If they are fit though, and they are getting the minutes, they're probably the best out of anyone on this spreadsheet right now. They're the best value 7.5s out there. So if you're willing to take a risk, their data is better. The fixtures are better as well in terms of an attacking set of fixtures. So I do like them. And of course they are differential. But the reason for that is because we just don't know what minutes they're going to get. Although I must admit, I think Diaz is one that I am slightly interested in because usually he seems to be more secure down that left wing, doesn't have quite as much competition there. Darwin prefers playing centrally, so does Gakpo, so does Jota. So Diaz is the one that maybe I'd be more tempted in because I think the minutes could be a bit more secure than the likes of Jota. The underlying XG per 90 matches Jota's as well, so I do like him, just maybe not as much as the likes of Gordon at the moment. Finally, on this spreadsheet is Maddison, differential, good data, 0.53 XGI per 90. But I think when you compare him to some of the other options in the midfielders at this price point, there are just slightly better ones out there. Let's wait and see on Spurs, I think. Personally, for me, I think if you're not going for Son, you could probably look at someone like Brennan Johnson, who I'll come on to. I think Maddison just awkwardly sits in the middle of them, and I don't think that there's enough there for me to spend the extra million over Brennan Johnson for the time being. But I do have my eye on him because I think at some point he will become a factor, especially because the way the bonus point system has changed, he should be one of the key beneficiaries of that switch this season. The chances he creates, the shots on goal he has benefited the most from this change than almost any other player in the player base this season. So don't discount him. From the off, though, I think I prefer Anthony Gordon. Then I do actually quite like the look of Diaz, probably second place as a bit of a punt. Then I'd probably go to someone like a Bowen, then a Fernandez. That would be my top four for the time being. So on to the 6 to 7 million midfielder category, and it's another really congested one. So apologies if I don't specifically call out every midfielder here. They are all, of course, on the table. I have missed a few out because there's just not enough space, but all of the important ones, or at least most of them, are here. If there are any I missed, put them in the comments below and we can have a chat about them there. In the meantime, though, Eberechi Eze, I think if he stays at Crystal Palace, 30.4 points across the first 5 game weeks expected from Fantasy Football Hub. That is by far and away the best of anyone in this price bracket, and it's much better than a lot of the 7.5 to 8.5 million midfielders as well. In fact, I think it matches the likes of Saka up at 10 million. So I really like him as an option. The fixtures are great for the opening 5 game weeks, and his underlying XG per 90 especially is really, really good. 0.40 for a midfielder for Palace is absolutely fantastic. Owned by a third of the game, so not exactly differential, but I think he's an important player to try and fit into your lineup as long as he doesn't get that summer move. And even if he did, I think then he could still be an option depending where he went to, for instance. Moving down, I'm going to skip over Trossard because he's a bit of a minutes risk, but if he was secure, I do like him when the fixtures turn later on. And Nkunku, I think, is a great option. Now, he was injured for most of last season, but he is in full training, starting pre-season friendlies at the moment, and looks pretty sharp. For how much you want that to count into your opinion, I don't really know, but still, it's worth something. At least he's not injured, right? And he is playing a bit of a floating role for Chelsea at the moment. The underlying data, even though it was limited minutes, has always been really good and was good last season. When he was in the Bundesliga, he was one of the hottest prospects in Europe as well. So this is a guy that I've got a lot of faith in. He should be a regular starter for Chelsea, but there's always that element of risk because he was injured most of last season. There is a bit of hit and hope with him about this one, but overall I think it's worth the risk. He's 4 million cheaper than Palmer. And yes, he's expected less points over the first 5, but I still think he's going to come out with a decent amount of returns in that period of time, even with a poor fixture rank in terms of attacking output anyway. So I do really like him, but I also really like the looks of Leon Bailey. I mentioned him in my differentials video, so if you haven't seen that, go check him out. I do talk about him more at length in that video as well, but his underlying data is really good. 0.58 XGI per 90. The problem historically with him has always been expected minutes, but those minutes should improve this season without Diaby there. With the fact that he had an outstanding season last year, got 21 attacking returns, I'd be surprised if he wasn't regularly getting 75, 80 minutes for Villa this season. Moving down again, Johnson's another player I mentioned in the differentials video. I do really like him. That underlying XG per 90 is really, really strong. If only he could hit a barn door though. So we need him to improve his shooting ability. He underperformed it massively last year. But if he starts becoming more consistent, which is certainly possible that he reverts to the mean and starts hitting the kind of numbers that we're expecting from him, he could be a fantastic option, especially later on down the line when the fixtures get a little bit better as well. Now, again, I don't think Garnacho is a player that I'm really considering at the moment. The fixtures aren't great. The underlying attacking data isn't fantastic, 0.39, but he is young and he is improving. So he could be a player that at times this season could be very, very good value for money at 6.5, but looking around, I don't think he exactly stands out at this price point. And I would say the same for the likes of Gross, Kudus, and possibly even Barnes as well, who is maybe a little bit of a special case that I'll come on to in a moment's time. The other player I wanted to properly mention is Gibbs White. Now, they've got good fixtures to start the season, but not necessarily the best from an attacking point of view. And whilst he should be on penalties, the underlying data isn't exactly outstanding. 0.38 XGI per 90. Expected points just a notch over 20 from the first 5. That's not bad, but it's also not outstanding. And I think when you've got other players beating him quite comfortably at this price bracket, and Chris Wood up front, who does hog a lot of the XG and a lot of the chances, for cheaper as well, for 0.5 million less, I think I'd probably prefer to have a look elsewhere at the 6.5 category rather than Gibbs White at this point in time. Although, again, he's a very talented player, so he could prove me wrong. Quick word on Barnes. His data is actually better significantly than Anthony Gordon's, his teammate. And again, he's another player I mentioned on the differentials video. If he's nailed, and if he starts getting consistent minutes, he could be fantastic value for money at 0.6% ownership and at 6.5 million. The fixtures aren't too bad, so you might want to take a bit of a gamble. And usually, although we haven't got a lot of data on this at this point, and usually he would take left wing for Newcastle. If both Gordon and Barnes were fit, Gordon would shift across to the right wing more often than not. Isak would obviously play through the centre, and that's a pretty strong front three as well. So the underlying data is good. He's very, very differential. Obviously, he's a risk for minutes, but he's very, very talented. He was unlucky with injuries. I think he'll have a big part to play this season, personally. If I was ranking these midfielders at the moment, I'd put Eze far, far, far beyond anyone else, as the expected points would suggest. Followed probably by Nkunku at the moment. Then I like Leon Bailey. And then in fourth, I'd probably go with Barnes as it stands. So now let's have a look at some of the cheaper midfielders, the 5 to 5.5 million mids. And I don't think it's outlandish to suggest that there could be a slot for one of these in our starting lineups in FPL this season, or maybe a 12th man kind of rotation option with a forward. Semenyo comes into the game at 5.5 as a midfielder, which is a position change, and he's only 1.3% owned, so that's not bad at all. The underlying data is not fantastic, although maybe it says a lot that he has got the best XG of any of these in the spreadsheet at the moment. There are a lot of other options I didn't have space for, but I think these are the most popular ones as it stands and the ones I'm most likely to consider. Personally, I'm not that convinced in Semenyo as an option right now. I think there are probably better ones out there, namely Hudson-Odoi, who's fourth in the ranking here, but I do prefer him than Semenyo, despite the fact his underlying data isn't as good. Again, I don't really have much to back this up. I've just got a bit of a gut feeling about Hudson-Odoi that he's ready to take another step up. I think the system will suit him again, and I'm hoping that he improves on that data for this season. I don't think he's an outstanding option, but at 5.5 million, I think he's one of the better ones out there. Another one I do like the look of is Andreas. I think out of all of these, he's either very close to or the best in terms of the combined XGI per 90, 0.35. And they do have the best fixtures from an attacking point of view. So I think, again, if I was ranking these midfielders, he'd probably come out on top, even though the expected points are lower than some of the other members in this spreadsheet. Rodgers is a really popular one at the moment, although only 5.9% owned by the whole of the FPL player base. He's a bit of a darling when it comes to the community online, and I think his ownership will rise as we get closer to the deadline, especially if he continues to have a really good pre-season. He is also cheaper than the rest of these players as well, and has very close to the best XG per 90. So I do like him as an option. I think for me, I'd want to just wait and see for a couple of weeks, just make sure he's nailed, and then also make sure that we even need a 5 million midfielder in our sides. It might be obvious after a couple of weeks that we don't necessarily need one, and we're going with a 3-4-3. We can have a 4.5 million midfielder and we bench them most weeks. Maybe he just won't be needed as that 11th man. Or it might be that we play a 3-5-2. Maybe the strikers in the less premium price points aren't that great and we need a fifth mid, and he could be the perfect fifth mid at that point. For now, though, I'm not all that convinced that I'm going to start with him. If he continues to have a bit of a barnstorming pre-season, then maybe I will change my mind. But for the time being, I'm not that hot on him. although that seems like an unpopular opinion at the moment. Now, a quick word on Hutchinson in particular, because I don't want to finish this video without mentioning him. He had a great second half to the season in the Championship with Ipswich, really started picking up on the data. I think he finished with 10 goals, 5 assists, or 10 goals, 6 assists, and he was improving week on week by the end. He's definitely a favourite of McKenna as well. He rates him very, very highly, and I do expect him to have a bit of a standout season in the Premier League, a bit of a coming-of-age season maybe. That being said, I don't think the fixtures are great, as you can see on the ticker here, and he is a player that maybe is just another wait and see for the time being. Overall, in this category, I think I prefer marginally Andreas as number 1. Hudson-Odoi probably comes in at number 2, then probably Semenyo, then Hutchinson, and then probably Rodgers after that. That's quite harsh on Rodgers, maybe up another rank or 2, but I think, especially for Rodgers, I just want to wait and see a couple of weeks. I'm not as hot on him as some of the community seem to be, although I'm very, very willing to change my mind at this point. So let me know in the comments below if you disagree with that. I'm not going to do a whole section on the 4.5 million midfielders because honestly, there just aren't enough to talk about, and a lot of them have come up from the Championship anyway, so we don't have data on most of them as it stands anyway. The one that I'm most convinced by as it stands is Harry Winks. He should be a regular starter for Leicester, won't have good underlying attacking data at all. He'll be a 2 to 3 point man most weeks, but at least he's a starter. And if you're playing a 3-4-3 and you're regularly benching that 5th mid, I think Harry Winks is as good an option as any personally. But if there are any other good options you like the look of, do leave them in the comments below. As we wrap up the video today, I'd love it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. That would be incredibly helpful, and if you turn that notification bell on, you won't miss out on my forwards version of the ranking system that will hopefully be coming in the next couple of days as well. In the meantime though, I hope you've enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next time as we gear up with the forwards ranking ahead of game week 1.